Hey guys, coming to another classic movie for you guys. Now I'm just going to tell you guys right off the bat, the movie I'm reviewing I really would not consider a classic, but continuing my series of the Bond reviews, as you guys know, I reviewed Casino Royale, and I'm going to review all the Daniel Craig Bond films, which, of course, in this one, since I just reviewed Casino Royale, would only make sense for me to review the 2008 sequel, direct sequel to Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace. And I'm going to tell you guys off the bat, I really was not looking forward to this movie, and I'm going to tell you guys why. Even though I love Casino Royale, that is a big movie to top. I mean, you got some really big shoes to fill. It is very rare that a first movie to a series is as good as Casino Royale was. I mean, there are only so many times I could think of that. But, whatever the next movie was going to be, it wasn't going to top this. I knew right off the bat that there's no way that this movie is going to top it. And I went into that knowing that, and I came out knowing even more so that this movie definitely did not top Casino Royale. It's not nearly as good as Casino Royale, and I think it's probably going to end up being the weakest of these Daniel Craig Bond films, because I really did not like this movie as much as I wanted to, and I'll talk about the main reason why. There are a lot of things that are wrong with this movie. There are things they definitely, I think, got somewhat right, but there are a lot of things I think they just got wrong. But let's get to the plot of this movie, which is pretty much it is exactly a direct sequel to Casino Royale. It actually starts exactly where Casino Royale left off, which is a cool idea. I do like the way they did that. But basically, after, what's happened with Vesper and everything, and how she died and everything, Bond is now on a revenge mission. He's on a full-on revenge mission, and he's assisted by this girl, Camille Monteith, and basically, he's trying to figure out what Mr. White's plan really was and everything, and once he does, he gets himself in, he finds out what's his plans and everything, he gets himself involved with this guy named Dominic Green, who is a wealthy businessman who's a member of this quantum organization, and basically, he wants to seize control of that country's water supply, and they have to stop him from doing so, and basically realizes how important the quantum organization is. That basically is the plot of this movie. I honestly don't know how to say the plot of this movie, because it's really confusing. I'm going to say that right off the bat. That's the one thing with this movie is that it's very confusing, and the plot really, to me, isn't really all that interesting. I'll get into that in a little bit, but let's first talk about the acting, because that's something that worked very well in the first one. One of the things that stuck out almost immediately to me in Casino Royale is how great all the performances were. They all really were fantastic. I thought they all really gave great performances, and mainly because they were such human characters. The problem with Quantum of Solace is that none of these characters are nearly as interesting in the one as Casino Royale. And let's talk about, of course, Daniel Craig, who I think definitely is trying in this movie. He's trying to be as good as he was in Casino Royale, and I think for the most part, he definitely gives a good performance. He still has the charisma that he did. He still has that dark presence that he did. He still has that a little bit menacing side that he did. In fact, there are some scenes where he's a little bit menacing. The problem is this movie strips away all the compelling aspects of what made Bond so great in Casino Royale. The problem with this is that he's supposed to be in this revenge mission, and I don't think there are enough scenes of him just seeing him grieving over what Vesper did and seeing him trying to deal with that and contemplating really what to do. There's not enough of that because this movie is so fast-paced that we don't really get to see much of that deep, personal character stuff that we got in Casino Royale. Casino Royale made it seem like it's going to be the most personal Bond yet, and I'm sure it still will be, but this movie just didn't really work in that respect. Now, is he a really good hero? Oh yeah, you're definitely rooting for him the whole time, but I just didn't really get that, not villainous, that's not the word, menacing, type revenge side of Bond that this movie really promised. I mean, definitely it's a dark Bond, but it also doesn't make him nearly as interesting. I mean, this movie really just shows that all Bond needs is a gun and then he's good. No, that's not what he needs. He needs cool gadgets. He needs more than that, and the movie doesn't really give him much to work with other than a couple action scenes and stuff to do. That really is my main problem, is that the movie in general just doesn't give much to work with. I didn't really find him to be nearly as interesting, and unfortunately, he's not enough to carry this movie. He's very good, definitely. He definitely does a good job. I'm not saying that he's bad in this movie. Craig, is just a very good actor in that way. The problem is, I just didn't find his character to be nearly as interesting as he was in the second one, and the first one. And to be honest with you guys, James Bond does not really feel like James Bond. He doesn't feel like this incredible assassin who knows what he's doing. He's very calculating, things like that. He just feels like a normal action hero, and that should never be the case with someone like James Bond, but that's exactly what he feels like in this movie. I didn't feel like I was watching a James Bond movie. I felt like I was watching just any random movie, and it doesn't really work. I didn't really think he definitely did a good job. He definitely tried. It just didn't work as well as it did in the first time. And unfortunately, because of Daniel Craig and because of how good he is, the other characters in this movie just don't really live up to how good they were in Casino Royale. I mean, like I said, just like Daniel Craig, our main Bond girl here, Olga Kurylenko, she definitely does try as this girl Camille, but she's just not interesting. There's nothing interesting about her. She's very plain. She's very much just, she's going on this personal mission. She has a personal vendetta against the villain, and you just don't really care about her. I didn't find her to be that interesting. The thing is, though, you can't blame her for trying, because she's definitely trying. I'm not going to say she wasn't trying, because she definitely did try. The problem is, her character was just, I think, really underwritten, and she really didn't do that great of a job. I mean, she did a good job. I'm not going to say she didn't do a good job. Her character in general just wasn't that interesting. I didn't really care about her. She did a good job, but she just wasn't that interesting of a Bond girl. And that's pretty much, you know, the same thing for all the other characters of this movie. Dominic Greenwood, you know, this character of Dominic Green, Matteo Almeric, just doesn't feel like a Bond villain. There's nothing interesting about him. The thing that made Mads Mikkelsen so great is because you understood where he was coming from, and there was so much great character work with him. In fact, if you guys noticed, there was a scene before Bond's even introduced in that movie. This movie, just immediately we're introduced to him, and he's just not that interesting. I didn't find, he doesn't even have that much of a motivation other than just do what a typical villain does, which is just take over something, and that's not what the villain Casino Royale was. Like, the best thing about Casino Royale is that the villain wasn't the actual, you know, head of something. He was someone that owes money to the head of something. That makes it a lot more interesting. Mr. White should be the villain in this movie. They make it seem like he's going to be. Unfortunately, he's only in 2 scenes in this movie. I don't know why, but they decided to do that, and the villain we have here, again, he's not bad, and he's not at all cartoony. That's the thing that I will definitely give him the benefit of the doubt. He wasn't at all cartoony, thank God, but he's just not that interesting. I didn't really like him that much at all, and the rest of the characters just aren't interesting at all, and Judi Dench, of course, who was so great in Casino Royale, just feels very underused, definitely. She's very underused. She's not really used that much at all, and when she's used, she doesn't have as nearly as fun as a presence as she does in the first one. I liked her character here. It's just I wanted a lot more of her, and I don't think we got nearly as much of her as we did. Her casting as M is just perfect, and she still is great in the role. She's just very underused and didn't get to do nearly as much as I want her to, and I'm sure she'll do more in Skyfall, because I know Skyfall is mostly all about her, but this, she just didn't do much of anything, and unfortunately was very disappointed by that. So that's really what I have to say about the acting. The acting, there's really not much to say, like I said, and it's mainly because of 2 things. I'll say the directing here, I didn't think was bad. I think the directing, I don't think that really is the problem here. I'll get into what the main problem of this movie, because it's certainly not the directing. The directing is not the main problem of this movie. The director here, who is the director of this movie? Let me check real quick. The thing with that is that it's not even that Mark Foster directed this movie, and I don't think he did a bad job necessarily. I just don't really know if he understands how a Bond movie really works, because again, this didn't really feel like a Bond movie. It just felt like any random action movie that's released at the end of the year. And again, I don't think it was ever going to be as good as Casino Royale, but it doesn't even have the same tone as Casino Royale. I think his directing was fine, but his tone, he does not understand Bond in the way Martin Campbell does. I don't know if Martin Campbell was unavailable, but I really wish we would have gotten Martin Campbell back for this movie, because he did such a great job of Casino Royale that I would have just brought him on for the second one. That would have been the right thing to do, is to bring him on. And I understand that Bond, they want to have a different director every movie to change up the style. I think that's a cool idea, kind of like what Mission Impossible does, but I really would have wanted Martin Campbell to be at the helm of this movie. I just think it would have been better if he was. Unfortunately, he wasn't, and that's one of the things that really does suffer in this movie. But my biggest problem with this movie, without a doubt, is the screenplay. The screenplay in this movie, or lack of one, if I may say, because every time there was a story in this movie, every 2 minutes, action scene, action scene, action scene. This movie is incredibly fast-paced, and it's way too fast-paced for a Bond movie. There isn't the great character work. All of that is pretty much gone in this movie, and that really is a real testament to the problem with this movie. It's just way too fast-paced, and it's honestly very confusing. I really did not find myself very interested in the story. mainly because it's a very confusing story, and it's way too confusing than it should be. The story should not be nearly as confusing as it is. The problem is, it's just not that interesting of a story, and it's not as easy to follow as what's going on here. The other thing I have with this movie is that I don't really think it was necessary, honestly. I mean, a lot of this felt like you could have just put it at the end credits or something like that, and yeah, it sounds interesting that Bond's going on this revenge mission and everything, but it felt more like something I'd see in like a video game than I would in a Bond movie. It just didn't feel like it really was all that necessary to continue the story. I don't really care about the whole Quantum organization. Honestly, I didn't care. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I did not care about this organization because, one, I really just wanted to get more inside the head of Bond. That was one of the best things about Casino Royale, is just getting inside his head, having it be this mission for him, and it didn't feel personal enough. It felt like Bond, nothing was really at stake for him. It felt like he could just take out guys, just easily, and nothing bad would happen. It just didn't really work in the way it did. The one thing I will definitely give this movie is the cinematography, which is incredible here. The cinematography looks amazing. The effects are great. The action scenes are very weighed down, but they still are great, and they still are very thrilling, and I really did enjoy the action scenes in this movie. They're not nearly as long as they were in Casino Royale, and I'll get to the why I think that is in a second, but I think the cinematography is really good here. I do feel the movie's a bit style over substance in points, so I definitely will say that. There's a lot of action here. It's a very action-heavy film, and James Bond, as good as it is, should not be action-heavy. Casino Royale proved that James Bond should be the amount of action and amount of character work, and this movie doesn't really do that. Whenever it starts up a conversation or something, just random action scene happens, and that's not how it was Casino Royale. There were times for action, and then there was time for speaking, and that's not how it really works in this movie, and it doesn't exactly work. There's this one scene very early on in the movie where Mr. White is trying to basically announce his plan and talk about everything that's going on and who his organization really is, and then immediately we get into this huge action scene. It really took me out of the movie. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of the action scenes of this movie kind of took me out of the movie, and it didn't really work in, I think, the way the movie wanted to. I think they made some good attempts, but it just didn't really work for me. I didn't really think that worked at all. And then as far as the score in this movie, the score right away things feel off, because the song in general, Another Way to Die, does not feel like a Bond song. It's not a bad song. Jack White and Alicia Keys do a good job with it, but it feels more like a jam session. It feels more like a joke Bond, honestly. That song in general, it feels like a joke Bond. This feels like a 90s, like, Hollywood Bond, and it just doesn't feel like a Bond song. It feels like a very Hollywoodized Bond. And the one that we got in Casino Royale, that feels like what Bond should be. This does not feel like a Bond song. That just didn't really work for me. That song in general, I'm not a huge fan of, I gotta say. It doesn't have the, it just doesn't have the instant re-listen like, You Know My Name does. I've heard You Know My Name so much. I keep listening to it because it's such a good song. And Another Way to Die isn't just nearly as catchy. It's not really that memorable, honestly, and it really is forgettable, just like this movie is. Honestly, it's kind of forgettable. The editing here is another big problem, because this movie is unusually short for a Bond film. Bond films should never be shorter than 2 hours. I don't know why this movie isn't 2 hours. It's only 106 minutes, and it flies by, obviously, but it also feels very resiliently short, and it really falls short of doing anything. I think that's the main problem. If we would have focused a little bit more and had a longer runtime, I think the movie could have focused a little bit more on the characters. We could have gotten some more work with them, and I think it would have been a lot more invested into what was going on. But unfortunately, because the movie barely is as short as it is, we just don't really get the time we do to focus on these characters, and that really killed a lot of the movie for me. And I'm really happy that they didn't stick with this, that they did in fact make the next one longer, because that's really what worked in Casino Royale. It benefited from that 3-act structure. This movie, it just feels very jumbled and very fast-paced, and unfortunately, it's very hard to tell what's going on, because as soon as something starts, then an action scene starts out of nowhere, and that really kills a lot of the movie for me. So overall, Quantum of Solace isn't a bad movie. It just isn't as good as I think other Bond movies are going to be. It doesn't feel like a Bond movie at times. It loses a lot of what makes a Bond film, but it does try. And because they try, I'm not going to give this a bad rating, but I am going to give Quantum of Solace a 3 out of 5 or a C. I can't see myself watching this movie again, honestly. This is the only Bond film I can't see myself watching again. Maybe if it's on TV, yeah, maybe a couple action scenes. There's a really good action scene in the climax of this movie, but again, it just feels like random thrown together action scenes in a cohesive film, and at points it just doesn't really feel like it needed to be made. There's nothing really that great about this movie. It's very average, it's very forgettable, and really out of all the Bond films, honestly, you could probably skip this and you'll be fine. I really don't think there's really not many spoilers this movie or anything like that. You could pretty much skip this and you'll be fine. You can go on to the other films, and I just didn't really find enjoyment in this like I did in Casino Royale, and it really lacks a lot of what made that movie great, as well as not really understanding the Bond character. There's just a lot of things that didn't work in this movie, and just very forgettable, and nothing I'd ever really see myself watching again, which is why I give it the rating I do. But overall, guys, in my review of Quantum of Solace, let me know what you guys thought of this movie. You have seen it. What do you think of it compared to Casino Royale? Again, I don't really think this movie could have been ever as good as Casino Royale. I just can't conceive that happening. But I am very excited to watch the final 2 Bond films. I have 2 left, and then I will be done with this series. I might start Skyfall right now, honestly, but that, of course, will be my next review. Well, not today, at least. My next review will be for Wayward Pines, and I will see you guys for that. But again, let me know what you guys thought of this movie, left your thoughts in it, and we'll see you guys next week, which will be for Wayward Pines. We'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.